Yeah, good evening, everyone. Loyal companions of Gourma, my pride. For this second episode, we will first discuss the borders before the colonial era. So, what we can say is that before the colonizers intruded, the Gourmanchê territory was extensive, stretching from the Sahel region, specifically the historical Liptako, which was previously inhabited by the Gourmanchbas, and this up to up to the north of present-day Ghana, particularly the Gambara area. There you go. So it was a vast territory that was about 150,000 square kilometers. So, in the Conquest Report of May 29th, 1897, when this question was posed to the Gourmanchê king, to Nombado Bankiande at the time, he indeed said that in the past, his territory extended from Liptako in the north to Gambara. There you go, which corresponds to the area we mentioned. It, this territory is now located, divided among uh, five sovereign states, namely Burkina Faso, where the largest part is Togo, Niger, Benin, and Ghana. Well, it should be noted that regarding the part located in Ghana, it was mainly when Germany lost World War I and its Togolese colony was divided between the French and the English. Since Togo was divided from north to south, and since the north of German Togo was Gourmanchê, so the north went to the Gold Coast to form the Gourmanchê settlement of present-day Ghana. So, in any case, before the colonial era, well, it was a vast country, but well, with colonization, it was reduced. There you go. So that's a bit of what we could say about the borders, the territory before colonial borders. There you go for the second subpoint. It's even worth adding the third because they go hand in hand. That is, the political system and then the territories. So, what we can say here is that politically it must be acknowledged that Diaba Lompo is the founding father. He reigned from 1204 to 1248 for 44 years. But well, when the kingdom was created, its capital was in Kudukbongo, in the current province of Kompienga. Well, it's from this part that indeed there were conquests that now gave the Gourmanchê territory we know. So it's a kingdom that was marked by conflicts with neighbors, particularly those from northern Togo, who were called, at the time, they were called the Tombas are very well known in traditional Gourmanchê circles. There you go. So there were these different confrontations. Well, and then there were internal quarrels. Well, it weakened the royalty a bit. So, otherwise, at the beginning, it was a centralized political system, since it was the first core. But with the conquests and the problems that came with them, followed well. The kingdom, upon the arrival of the colonizers, was fragmented, if we can say so. That is to say, well, there were many entities that were independent. There you go. And that's why when we read the conquest report, precisely at the arrival of the colonizers, and as they got information from the notables of Ngulu, because it was Numbado Bankende who signed the Protectorate Treaty on January 20th, 1895, with Commander Decker, who came from Dahomey. There you go for the conquest, the occupation of the Gourmanché country. But it had to start first with the Protectorate treaties. So if we stick to what the notables of Fada, who were allies of the French, say, the country was divided into 18 provinces. That is to say, diamas, there you go. And thus each administered by a numbado, that is to say, a chief elected by the notables, but whose appointment must be validated by the king, the numbado. So that means that upon the arrival of the colonizers, well, what they found that remained as a system was a decentralized mode. That is to say, among all the chiefs there, they were all, as one would say, equals, but still, the Numbado is recognized as the elder of all the Gourmanché chiefs. So he must be respected. There you go. But the other chiefs, as they're called, diemas, the others, well, the other provinces called diemas if it's in the south, and Kwamba if it's in the north, are notable authorities who chose the chief. But well afterwards, they must go to Fada to pay homage. There you go. So that's a bit of the political system that was in place at the arrival of the French. So to summarize, there was initially a central state, but afterwards there were provinces, that is to say, diamas or kwamba, independent from each other, but with the predominance of the numbado, recognized as the elder, that is to say, the nongo, is the first political entity established in Gourmanché country. So at least there it's well known. There you go, it's a bit. And now, in terms of territory, precisely, there were the different diamas had their territory, their command. There you go. So there was no centralized command, at least on the eve of the colonial conquest. And my dear George, who was the first to really study the Gourmanché country extensively, said that the different diamas functioned exactly like kingdoms. And the country of Gourmanché is not the only one undergoing this type of development. Even the Moaga region, meaning the Mosi people. It started in Gambara, coming to Tinkorgo. So over there, the chieftaincy really organized itself, and it was a single Moaga state. But later, the kingdom of Ufenga, which is Wahiguya, was created. The kingdom of Yakanga, which is Yakanga, was created. And there is the kingdom of Busa. There you go. So all these daimas are independent from each other. There you go. It's an evolution. But otherwise, we always talk about the father kingdom of Tinkorgo. All the Mosi kingdoms, all the Combere there, they have their base in Tinkorgo. Here's what can be said about the politics and territory of the Gourmanché. There you go. Well, regarding the trade routes, so first, it should be acknowledged that the Gourmanché and the Gourmanchba were not prominent traders. There you go. They were not great merchants. It even means that, well, if you notice, well, even today, they are not very, very effective in commerce. But however, the territory, Gourmanché was crossed by merchants known as the Wangara, who were actually traders passing through. And those routes were the ones that originated in the Hausa region and led to the Gourmanché region, and we found ourselves in the north of Ghana, Gambara, and in the center, Kupela. There you go. That was a very important route. But there were also routes going towards Dori. There you go, where people practiced. Well, but at the time, what was it? It was the trade of kola, the trade of tamari, the trade of fabrics. But there were convoys, they were convoys made up of hundreds of donkeys. Well, that crossed. But before crossing the Gourmanché region, there were agreements with local chiefs, who ensured their protection. They could even spend a week, well, in a locality to rest and then try to sell the products. There you go. And they were under the protection of the chiefs. But in return, there were gifts, that were given to the local chiefs, for that protection. And often even they escorted them so they wouldn't fall victim to looting by isolated elements. There you go. A bit. Otherwise, those routes, they pass through the north of Benin, Hausa country. It's Niger, then Nigeria. And now, there were also routes leading to Moaga country, that is to say, among the Mosi. So, well, there you go a bit, what we could say regarding the trade routes. The historical influence, what can be noted is that the Gourmanché country, well, was in relation with the neighbors, but the relations were sometimes peaceful, sometimes conflictual. There you go. If we consider the Fulani, it remains, as we said in the past, this entire area belonged to the Gourmanchba. In fact, all the localities, the names of the localities, Dori, Bani, etc., these are Gourmantche's names. There you go. So the Gourmanchba dominated this area for a long time before precisely the Fulani revolted, because precisely they were under pressure, a lot of pressure from the Gourmanchba, especially since there were Muslim elements involved. That is, Ousmane Danfodio from Niger, there from Sokoto. Well, when he wanted to launch the jihad, well, he was able to gain followers locally who were already discontent because the Gourmantche chiefs practiced the traditional religion. However, the others were there to precisely impose Islam. So I think that, well, it's one thing or another. Well, it led to, there were many problems in this area, and the Gourmanchba retreated to Kuala. There you go. Well, but that was really conflictual, especially with the tradition of Islam. Now, there are also relations with the Mara country, the Mossi. Well, they have strong relations, strong ties, since they even crossed the Niger River together from the borders of Chad to meet up towards Gambara, moving up. There, bonds of fraternity have been woven. There you go, between the Mosi and the Gourmanchba. However, as within, both among the Gourmanchba and the Mosi, there were many problems, especially during succession periods. That is, when the king dies and they want to install a new king, there have always been problems. And it's at this time that sometimes the Mosi ask the Gourmanchba to help them install their king, or it's the Gourmanchba who also ask the Mosi to install their king. And there we have, for example, the example of Numbado Bankande, precisely when there was the succession crisis in Nongo. So, as they were in conflict with Diapango, the Numbado was forced to retreat to Diabo. And from Diabo, he called upon the Mosi of Kupela, Bursa, Lapu. And in fact, when we read the conquest report, the Mosi chiefs of Bursa and Kupela did come to his aid, but they were not able to defeat Diapango, which was the main center of resistance at the time. So that means there were serious conflicts, and it was in the Numbado's inability to defeat his enemies that he was advised to call upon the colonizers who were there. And that's how he signed the Protectorate Treaty. That was on January 20th, and now 1895. And we know that in their agreement, the Numbado specifically wanted the French to help them neutralize all adversaries. And that's what was done in 1897. They defeated both Diapango and everything else. So the relationships there, the influences were sometimes peaceful, sometimes conflictual, with both close and distant neighbors. There you go. Because we've already talked about conflicts with the northern Tuku Tombas, which we now call Chokose. There you go. So it's relationships like that, that animated political life at the time. So there was a lot of political influence. Well, then given that, on the eve of the conquest, it wasn't just the Gourmanché country. Whether among the Pils or the Mosses, there were problems. That's what even made it easier for French, English, and German colonizers to easily conquer Africa, because there was a lot of external influence and there were internal problems. So these are all the problems we're trying to really solve, patch up, so that we can move towards peace. That's a bit of what we could say. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I'm ready to answer them. The answers that I'm able to give. Because really, well, what you're asking for is just summaries. There you go. And we stick to summaries to stay within the framework of what the gourmand wished for and still wishes to have. Well, the debates are open and everyone can contribute. If there are any new elements, historians, we are ready to take them. You need to have at least reliable sources, ancient sources. So that can help us move forward. And I think it can also help us move towards peace, because all the problems the Gourmanché country faces and that Burkina faces are largely due to a lack of historical knowledge. There you go. Thank you once again and see you next time.